Hey YouTube, Jonathan here, and for this video I wanted to continue our series with Axis and Allies Classic and focus on Imperial Japan. Now if you're playing this game and you want to take on the role of a country with options on turn 1, Japan is going to be the country for you. In fact, once I had gotten a few games under my belt, and quickly realized the situation with Germany up with Karelia in Eastern Europe, and how that gets bogged down very quickly, and how Russia, for the most part, also was tied very closely with what was going on then at that front, and how England, unlike other versions, doesn't really have a whole lot of navy down here, and is also probably going to be focused heavily up there. It very quickly became apparent that Japan, by far, has the most options. You do go fourth in turn order, but there is very little that the other allies are likely to do to kind of mess things up for you. It's possible the Russians could devote everything to coming down here in Manchuria. That didn't happen very often in my games, but it's possible. It's possible England might do something completely unexpected and maybe pick up some guys in a transport, move around here, attack Kwangtung with a fighter. The prospects for success aren't that great, so there could be some radical things, but assuming that the Allies aren't doing something, radical like that, things are going to be pretty stable on your front. And like I said, you have a lot of options. Chances are you are going to be able to successfully complete at least 3 out of 4 of these things, possibly all 4 of them, from what I'm about to outline, depending on how things look. So let's start over here in the Pacific. You definitely have the advantage to easily sweep in here and take out the American fleet at Pearl Harbor and have a number of ships left over. Carriers do defend at 3 in this version of the game, and subs to get their first strike. There are no destroyers, which means you can't really negate that ability, but you can take your sub as a casualty. If you wanted to move this transport down, you could also take that as a casualty. So chances are you're going to be able to wipe out that American fleet potentially without really taking any heavy damage to your powerful capital ships. So that's option 1. Certainly you don't have to do it, but you have more than enough to go after it if you even feel the inkling. And you have at least 1 unit, that sub, that you can use to take a hit before anything else, before you have to worry about anything else. You also have, if you wanted to send this fighter in, 1 to get off the island, 2, 3, 4, but that carrier is going to be over there. And so you could land on the carrier too, so you can get that fighter in there. You could also send this fighter from Japan down here, the bomber. You probably don't need to, but you could if you wanted to. Like I said, options. Now we'll come over here. These guys over in Kwangtung, they only have 1 way to go, so of course they're going to go in there. You're probably going to want to save at least your bomber for that. If not, a fighter from here or from down here. Actually, this fighter, 1, 2, 3. That fighter can't make it, but this fighter up here can, to get into China. You could devote an infantry or 2 from here or here. Make sure you take China. You have also 2 transports, both of which could pick up guys and could land in Soviet Far East. So Hawaii is 1 potential target. China is another target. Soviet Far East would be a 3rd possible one. Both your transports can get there. You've got guys in Manchuria if you don't need them for China, and you don't need to hold them back to defend against Yakut, or a counterattack from Yakut. You could devote them up there. You could also move all your guys in Manchuria up that way and just use the transport to reinforce Manchuria. So that is number 3. And if we go down south, depending on how things look over here, you certainly have some fighters. Let me see. 1, 2, 3. That fighter is not going to be able to make it. But this if we didn't send this bomber over here, you could send that bomber down there. Assuming that the UK player leaves that transport, if they move it, you don't even have to worry about taking it out. You can leave minimal forces down here in Indochina just to make sure a Xingqiang counterattack doesn't cause you problems. And then you can potentially move into India. Now, the likelihood, I don't think is great that you'll be able to move into both Soviet Far East and India on your turn. But unless Soviet Far East is heavily reinforced, you should I doubt India is going to be heavily reinforced. There's a good chance you can take out at least one of those two, and that gets down to the 3 out of 4 option that I mentioned before. Hawaii, of course. China, you should definitely be able to get, and then one of these two, Soviet Far East or India. So that's your third one, with the potential, depending on what the Allies do, of getting the fourth one. That is about the maximum stretch that you could do on your turn. Sure, you could move down to Australia, but you're only going to be able to land 2 infantry. You could do something, with this carrier or that fighter on the carrier, get a coastal bombardment, but then you have to forego taking out the American fleet. And do you really want this fleet to group with this little, or this battleship anyway, battleship and transport up here? Do you really want that to consolidate? I usually don't. At least from what I recall, that was a move in almost all of our games. We would, take that out. And so then your plan or your strategy is just going to be about pushing forward. Now you've got control all the way along the front, either this way or that way. On your turn 2, you're going to take whatever the remaining option was on turn 1, so that you have this whole front, move into Xingqiang and move one space, basically just keep expanding over. So let's say you took the Soviet Far East and not India. You're going to take Yakut, you're going to take Xingqiang, and you're going to take India on your second turn. If you took India, you'll push into Persia, you'll still take Xingqiang, and then you'll take Soviet Far East. And you're just going to start pushing this way. The goal being to put as much pressure on Russia as quickly as possible, so they have to start pulling stuff away from Karelia, or at the very least stop putting new stuff there. You can potentially threaten them from the south if you move into Persia. You could swing around this way, you could swing around that way. You can force the Allies, England and or the United States, to devote more resources to Africa. If you've got a transport or two and the Allies aren't able to move things through the Suez Canal, or you have enough capital ships that it's a real threat to them, you could start moving into Africa, forcing them, again, to pull units away from Germany, so that, worst case scenario, they're not able to slowly squeeze Germany as effectively as they otherwise could. Best case scenario, you put Germany in position to break out. And that is what I would focus on as Japan. You aren't going to be coordinating as closely with Germany as, let's say, England and the US would. That's just normal, but you need to make sure that your strategic objectives are aligned. And it's my conjecture that you should be aligned on taking out the Soviet Union as quickly as possible. If Germany is getting pinned down and you're over here trying to fight the US in the Pacific, there's not really a whole lot of production that's changing hands, and the US has more production than you to begin with, so even if they match you in production, they can still devote a small amount to fighting Germany, like supplementing Great Britain's forces, or just, a transport with some units every turn or something like that. They can, or, a fighter or a bomber to strategically bomb. They can devote resources every turn or every other turn or something like that. So that isn't really your best bet. You just want to hold off the United States and then take advantage of your position and your units and just run hot and heavy into the Soviet Union, down here into Africa. That is your best bet, in my opinion. So, like I said, Japan starts off with a lot of options. There aren't a whole lot of forces arrayed against it, and it's important for the success of the Axis that the Japanese player take full advantage of that and grab as much as they can as quickly as they can, and then press on and don't let up the pressure. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. We'll have one more in the United States, and then I plan to make an overall Allied video and an overall Axis strategy video, like some of my other series. And as always, if there's anything in particular you'd like to see, or feedback on a strategy that you'd like to get, feel free to leave that in the comments, and I will take a look at it. Thanks, everybody.